The wind screamed across the open plains, sharp and unrelenting, dragging sheets of white dust that cut against the skin like tiny blades. Luke Callahan kept his head low, the brim of his hat collecting frost, his long duster whipping against his legs with every gust. His horse, an old gray named Boone, moved slow through the snow, the sound of hooves muffled by the endless, frozen ground. It was nearing midnight. The world was a quiet wasteland of white and shadow, the kind of cold that stole words and left men thinking only of survival. Luke had been riding the fence line since dawn, fixing a break in the wire where coyotes had slipped through. The storm had rolled in faster than expected, swallowing the mountains in a wall of gray. He should have been home hours ago, but the stubborn part of him, the same one that made him stay on this lonely ranch after everyone else had gone, kept pushing forward until the work was done. He was just cresting the ridge above his land when something caught his eye, a small, dark shape moving through the snow below. At first, he thought it was a stray animal, a coyote, maybe, or a lost calf. But then it staggered, almost collapsed, and a faint sound carried through the wind. It wasn't a howl. It was human. Luke pulled on Boone's reins, narrowing his eyes against the storm. "What the hell?" he muttered under his breath. The figure stumbled again, falling to its knees, and his gut twisted. Without another thought, he kicked his horse forward, riding hard through the snow. As he drew closer, the wind eased just enough to show her clearly, a girl, young, thin, no more than 17 or 18. Her hair was matted with frost, tangled around her face. Her dress was torn, the hem stiff with ice, and she had nothing more than a thin shawl around her shoulders. Her lips were cracked and blue, her hands bare and shaking. Luke dismounted, boots crunching deep into the snow. The girl tried to rise, but her legs gave out beneath her. He caught her before she fell, his gloved hands brushing against skin that felt like stone. "Easy," he said, his voice rough and low. "You'll freeze solid out here." She tried to speak, but her voice came out a whisper. I thought the town was close." "It ain't," he said. "You're a good 20 miles from anywhere." "How long you been walking?" She shook her head weakly. "Since morning, maybe. I don't know." Her eyes fluttered, unfocused, dazed from cold and exhaustion. "Please," she breathed, "I can't go back." Luke looked down at her, the snow swirling between them. He didn't ask who she meant or what she was running from. He didn't need to. He'd seen that look before, the kind that spoke of fear, of something ugly chasing behind. He tightened his grip around her shoulders, steadying her trembling frame. "You'll come with me," he said simply. "I've got a fire going back home." She tried to shake her head. "I don't want to be trouble." He let out a breath that came out white in the dark. "You already ain't. Trouble's what happens when a man leaves someone to die." She blinked at him as if not used to kindness, as if she was waiting for him to change his mind. But Luke didn't waver. He lifted her easily into his arms, she weighed almost nothing, and set her across his saddle. Boone snorted, stamping impatiently at the cold. "Hold on," Luke said as he climbed up behind her. She tried, her fingers clutching weakly at his coat, and he wrapped one arm around her to keep her steady as they rode. The storm bit at them, slicing through the dark, but Luke pressed forward. He could feel the girl trembling against him, small and brittle, like she might shatter if he held too tightly. He didn't speak. There wasn't much to say. The world was narrowed to the sound of the horses' hooves, the rush of the wind, and the faint weight of her against his chest. It took nearly half an hour to reach the cabin. The snow came up past Boone's knees by the time they reached the gate, and Luke could barely see the outline of the barn through the swirling white. When they finally stopped, the girl was almost limp, her head resting against his shoulder. Luke swung down first and caught her again as she slid from the saddle. "You're all right," he said, though she couldn't answer. He half carried, half guided her to the cabin, pushing open the heavy wooden door with his shoulder. Warmth hit them immediately, though faint. The fire had burned low, but the coals were still glowing. He set her near the hearth and dropped to one knee, feeding logs into the flames until they caught, the room filling with light and heat. The girl huddled close to the fire, her body shaking so hard she could barely keep still. Her lips were pale, her eyes glassy with exhaustion. Luke stood, pulled a thick wool blanket from his bunk, and draped it around her shoulders. "Sit still," he said quietly. "You'll thaw out quicker." She looked up at him, her voice a faint rasp. Why are you helping me?" Luke shrugged, turning away to pour water into a pot. "Because someone should." She didn't speak again. She just stared at the flames, as if she couldn't quite believe she was still alive. The minutes stretched, the silence broken only by the crackle of fire and the faint hiss of melting snow dripping from her clothes. After a while, Luke knelt again, checking her hands. The skin was raw and red but not frostbitten. She flinched when he touched them, but didn't pull away. "You'll be sore for a bit," he said. "But you'll live." Her eyes lifted to his, uncertain. "You don't even know me." "No," Luke said, "and you don't know me either." That's how trust starts. Something flickered in her gaze, fear, hope, both tangled together. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to say something more, but instead she whispered, "Sir, can I?" She hesitated, her breath shaking, her voice barely audible. "Can I slip under your coat? Just for a moment. I can't stop shaking." The words hit Luke like a blow. For a moment he didn't move, didn't breathe. The request wasn't bold, it was broken, a plea born from desperation, not daring. He saw her sitting there, drenched and shivering, eyes wide with cold and fear, and he felt something inside him crack. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. "You're cold," he said finally. She nodded, too ashamed to meet his eyes. Luke hesitated only a second longer, then unbuttoned his coat and opened one side toward her. "Come on," he said softly. Her movements were slow, uncertain, as she slid closer. When she leaned in, he wrapped the coat around both of them, the heavy leather swallowing her small frame. She trembled against him, her cheek brushing his chest, her breath faint and warm through the fabric. Luke didn't move. He didn't speak. He just sat there, staring into the fire while the storm raged outside. Slowly, her shaking eased, her breathing steadied. The heat of her seeped through the layers between them, fragile but real. In that silent moment, Luke realized something he hadn't in years, how long it had been since another heartbeat had rested so close to his own. The cabin was small, the fire soft, and the world outside merciless, but here, under the fold of his coat, there was warmth again. And though neither of them said a word, both knew something had changed. Morning came slow and quiet, creeping through the frost-glazed windows of the cabin. The world outside was white and unmoving, the kind of stillness that made every sound feel louder, the crack of the fire, the faint creak of the timbers, the breath of the wind. Slipping under the door, Luke Callahan stirred from his chair, the stiff ache of sleep sitting heavy in his shoulders. He blinked at the light, then at the figure still curled by the hearth. The girl hadn't moved much through the night. She was wrapped in his coat, small and still, her hair spilling across the wool blanket like melted snow. The fire had burned low, just embers now, glowing red beneath the ash. Luke reached out, careful not to wake her, and fed the fire with a few logs until it caught again, flames licking up through the new wood. When she finally stirred, it was with a small sound, half sigh, half whisper. Her eyes fluttered open, blinking at the sudden light, confusion crossing her face for a moment until she remembered where she was. Her gaze darted toward Luke, and she sat up slowly, clutching the coat tighter around her shoulders. "You didn't leave," she said, her voice rough from sleep and cold. Luke shook his head. "I don't leave people out in storms." She tried to smile but it came out weak, more like an apology than gratitude. "I thought maybe you'd gone." It felt like a dream. He went to the stove, poured the rest of the boiled water into a tin cup, and stirred in some coffee grounds. "Dreams don't smell this bitter," he said, handing it to her. "Careful, it's hot." She took it with trembling fingers, warming her hands on the cup before daring a sip. Steam curled around her face, softening the blue tinge in her lips. For a while, neither spoke. The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy with things unsaid. Luke leaned against the table, studying her quietly. The firelight revealed more now that the snow and night weren't hiding her. She was young, too young to be out there alone, with soft features worn down by exhaustion. Faint bruises shadowed her throat and cheek, marks that told a story she hadn't yet shared. Her clothes were poor and torn in places, the fabric thin enough that the cold had nearly taken her life. She caught him looking and turned her eyes away, her fingers tightening on the cup. "You must think I'm foolish," she murmured. "Walking out there with no coat, no horse, nothing." "I think you're alive," he said simply. "That's something." Her lips parted, like she wanted to argue, but no words came. Instead, she took another sip, the warmth bringing color back to her face. "You saved me," she said after a moment, barely above a whisper. "I don't even know your name." "Luke," he replied. Luke Callahan. She nodded slowly. I'm Clara. Clara Wynne. Clara, he repeated quietly, testing the name like a secret. You from town? She shook her head. Farther south. Near Red Creek. He frowned slightly. That was nearly 50 miles away. That's a long way to walk. I didn't plan it, she said, her eyes fixed on the fire. I just had to go. Didn't matter where. Just away. Luke didn't press her. He'd learned long ago that people told the truth in their own time. He poured himself some coffee and sat down across from her, the chair creaking beneath his weight. The wind outside had calmed to a faint hum, a lull after the night's fury. You can stay here till the storm passes, he said finally. A few days, maybe more. You'll be safe. Her eyes flicked to his, searching for something, motive, condition, the hidden catch in his words. But she found none. Luke's face was calm, unreadable but kind. I don't want to be a burden, she said softly. You're not. Clara looked down at her hands again, her fingers small and pale around the tin cup. The warmth of his coat still clung to her, the faint smell of smoke and leather wrapped around her like a shield. It felt strange, being warm again, being safe in the presence of a stranger. After a long pause, she asked quietly, Do you always live out here alone? Been that way a few years, he said. Ranch keeps me busy. Company's rare. Don't you get lonely? Luke stared into his coffee for a moment before answering. Sometimes. But loneliness don't bite as hard as regret. She didn't understand at first, then realized there was something behind his words, something that had left him quieter than most men. She wanted to ask what, but the look in his eyes stopped her. Instead, she said, I don't think I've ever met someone like you. Luke gave a faint shrug, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Most folks say that before they leave. She smiled too, small but real. I don't plan on leaving just yet. He nodded once, as if that settled it. The fire crackled between them, the room growing brighter as the morning sun touched the window. Hours passed slowly. Luke went about his chores, chopping wood and checking on the horses in the barn, while Clara cleaned up what she could inside the cabin, folding blankets, sweeping the floor, setting things in quiet order. There was something steady about her movements, a need to prove her worth even when no one asked her to. When Luke returned, brushing snow from his shoulders, she turned to him quickly, as if afraid he might scold her for touching anything. You don't have to do that, he said. I want to, she replied, not meeting his eyes. It makes me feel like I belong. Luke paused in the doorway, watching her for a long moment. Then go on, he said finally. That night, after supper, the storm began again, but softer this time, a whisper instead of a roar. The cabin was warm, filled with the smell of stew and wood smoke. Clara sat near the window, wrapped once more in his coat, watching the snow fall in quiet wonder. Luke sat at the table, mending a broken bridle strap by the lamplight. The steady rhythm of his hands was calming, like everything he did was weighted and careful. Clara turned toward him, her eyes catching the light. Luke, she said softly. He looked up. Thank you. For last night. For everything. He nodded, eyes dropping back to his work. You don't owe me thanks. Just promise me one thing. What's that? Don't walk into another storm without a place to go. Her lips curved in a sad smile. I wasn't looking for a place. Just a way out. Then maybe you found both, he said. Silence filled the room again, but it wasn't empty. It was the kind of silence that builds trust, the kind that says more than words could. Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing the footprints of the night before. When Clara finally rose to add wood to the fire, Luke noticed her hands had stopped trembling. Her movements were steady now, sure, like someone who had remembered what it felt like to be safe. He watched her quietly, then turned back to his work, his chest heavy with something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't love, not yet, it was something softer, older, like a promise unspoken. Later, when the fire burned low and the night pressed close around the cabin, Clara sat by the window one last time before bed. The snow outside glowed faintly under the moonlight, untouched and endless. Luke moved to close the shutters, but she stopped him. Leave it, she said softly. I like seeing it. It feels peaceful now. He hesitated, then nodded. All right. She smiled faintly, pulling the coat tighter around her. You make it feel peaceful. Luke froze for a heartbeat, then looked away, his jaw tightening slightly. Get some rest, he murmured. As she lay down by the fire, Her eyes drifted shut, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she slept without fear. Luke sat in the chair nearby, watching the flames dance low, listening to the quiet breathing of the girl he'd found in the snow. Outside, the storm moved on. Inside, warmth stayed, and though the rancher said nothing, his heart, silent for years, had started to thaw, one breath at a time.